If you've been paying attention to movies lately, you've probably heard all the buzz around Sean Baker's incredible film, Anora. I mean, it just got nominated for a ton of Oscars.
You're a Borisov in Anora.
For original screenplay, the nominees are Anora, written by Sean Baker.
Mikey Madison.
For achievement in directing, the nominees are Sean Baker for Best Motion Picture of the Year.
Anora!
So if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it, both for the amazing story, but also the beautiful cinematography that gives the movie so much of its vibe and style. Actually, I was so impressed after watching it that I reached out to the DP, Drew Daniels, because I wanted to know more about how he made this breakout indie film looks so damn good. And luckily for us, he was down to chat and dropped a ton of amazing filmmaking knowledge that's going to be super useful for filmmakers of all levels.
Often your limitations are what dictate a lot of your stylistic and creative choices, and I think that's okay. As long as you have like an interesting concept, that's better than having the Alexa 65 and the airy rental lenses or the whatever it might be. You could shoot with the FX3 and have an incredible film. Anora is quite grounded, you know, the camera language is very grounded.
It's almost stock-like in a way.
Again, like heart. The movie has so much heart. I think that's why it won the Palme d'Or. When we were finding the look of the film, we tested this lens and it was like, holy crap, this is the look of Anora. I don't know, I like to work quick, I like to make quick decisions, and I like to keep that energy going on set. He's an auteur, you know, and I think there's a difference between auteurs making art and making a film to make money.
So in this video, we'll go over how Sean and Drew were able to work together to stretch a relatively small indie budget while still achieving incredible results, the gear and lighting equipment he used to get such a distinctive look, how he goes about planning for a film like this, and how his close collaboration with Sean Baker made the film better. Right off the bat, I wanted to ask Drew how they approached this shoot because on one hand, it's a relatively low budget indie film compared to what some Hollywood films cost, but they still managed to make it feel like an epic story. And that's not at all easy to do, so I wanted to know what Drew's mindset was and what that means for other filmmakers out there who might not be lucky enough to be working with a director like Sean Baker just yet.
I think that often your limitations are what dictate a lot of your stylistic and creative choices, and I think that's okay. I think you have to curate the film in a way to what the scope of it, what the budget is, you know? I mean, that's a big mistake I find a lot of filmmakers making. It's like they just have like this ridiculously ambitious project and they have not even anywhere close to the resources available to do it, you know? So like Anora is quite grounded, you know, and the camera language is very grounded. It's like literally on the ground for one. There's like, I don't think there's no crane shots or anything like that, you know, there's no techno cranes, we had like a jib for like one or two shots, but we didn't really use it as like a big like sweeping jib type of thing. That wasn't part of the language, you know, and actually it's usually not part of the things that I do. I don't really like that.
It's almost stock-like in a way.
Yeah, I like on the ground filmmaking. Like I like the camera to be about right here and I'd rather be wider and closer and in it. And simple, you know, so I think that's a big thing. I think simple and tailoring your film to your resources. I mean, my favorite films are like George Washington, like it's David Gordon Green's one of his first films. Absolutely beautiful, anamorphic 35, shot in like small town North Carolina with like mostly non-actors, and incredible film. I remember watching that in film school. A lot of the films I watched in film school were films that sort of hammered that in, you know, Slacker, like these little indie films with like big heart, you know, and not big resources. That's my my tip there, you know.
Yeah, don't be like, well, if I can finally once I can afford you know, Alexa 65, I'll make this thing.
Yeah, I mean, you don't really need it. I mean, as long as you have like an interesting concept and an interesting story, then that's better than having the Alexa 65 and the brand new airy rental lenses or the whatever it might be, you know, like, or the newest Panavision lenses or the newest this or that or that. I mean, like you could shoot on Zeiss super speeds with the FX3 and have an incredible film if the concept is there, you know. Like I think about Nickel Boys. I saw that recently, and it's a very simple film, and it's shot pretty much entirely in point of view with a Sony Rialto. They shot with the Venice and Rialto mode, you know, so they're basically, so the camera is like this and they could tilt, pivot, and it feels like your head, and it's just poetic beautiful. I think it's revolutionary, and that's a very simple film with a big concept. I think it was probably a pretty small budget film as well. I don't know what it was, but Anora was around 6 million, which for me and for us, like, that felt big. That felt like what we needed. We're also taking that and stretching it to the absolute maximum. We have like private jets, we have a helicopter shot, we have a unit, we go to Vegas, we come back, we go back to that. It's like there's a lot going on in this little film.
The mansion.
Yeah, and the mansion location was mind-blowing. And we were there for like 3 weeks or something, and we shot for 39 days or something like that. That's very luxurious for our little film. So it's really smart producers knowing where to put the money and knowing how to get away with murder, just maximizing and keeping things simple but bold. And again, like heart. The movie has so much heart. I think that's why it won the Palme d'Or. It just oozes heart. You watch it and you just, I don't know, it just feels like a real powerful film that with filmmakers that really cared what they were doing and gave their all. Yeah,
100%. Yeah, there is a feeling to it. I mean, I watched it on Saturday night, and on Sunday morning I emailed you, and there's just something about it. I was like, this is great. And like, for anyone, $6 million. I mean, I've worked on reality shows with bigger budgets than that. Like, it's what you needed. But for anyone watching, like, that is not a huge budget in the scope of what people spend in film and TV. So, I mean, you really did.
That's like a 30-minute episode of TV,
Yeah.
Like some, more or less. Like it's, or maybe an hour-long episode of TV. But usually it's a little more than that. Yeah, it's not a lot. And shooting on 35 millimeter anamorphic in New York City, I mean, it's very ambitious.
I heard you somewhere on a podcast, I think, maybe it was, I don't know, somewhere I heard you call the movie anti-Hollywood or anti-traditional. What does that mean?
I guess to me, well, maybe it's not anti, maybe it means more, it reminds me of the bold and intrepid Hollywood of the 70s, like sort of the Hollywood new wave, which in its essence was very like anti-Hollywood. It was doing the anti of like of what films were doing before in like the 50s and early 60s and whatnot, And I think this movie is like kind of the anti-blockbuster as well. It's like relatively unknown actors, all on location, like not always pretty. I think that's a really important thing that I like to stress with my work, is like, it doesn't always have to be pretty. It's not about making pretty pictures, And the coverage is not like traditional Hollywood coverage. The structure of the film, I just feel like so many things about it are just like non-traditional. I don't want to just say like anti-Hollywood, but like Sean is not like your typical Hollywood director, even though he does live in West Hollywood. He's an auteur, and I think there's a difference between auteurs making art and making a film to make money. You know what I mean?
I mean, I couldn't agree more with what Drew just said. It's all about heart and story, and then using cinematography to accentuate that instead of being obsessed with the technical stuff or thinking you need crazy resources to make something good. I don't think anyone who watched Anora would ever say it looks cheap, because let's be real, it looks amazing. And maybe even more importantly, it has character. It's got such a unique vibe, and it doesn't try to look like a massive studio movie, and I mean that in the best possible way. Sometimes filmmakers feel so much pressure to make something that they think will sell that they don't put their own spin on things because they're afraid to go against the grain in case it hurts their prospects financially. So then logically, I wanted to know what the pre-production process looked like, because this is one area where a lot of filmmakers struggle, and it's so important. Like, I know a lot of people skip over pre-pro, especially at the lower levels or the entry levels. Like, do you think that pre-pro was critical for getting on the same page?
Yeah. Well, because I didn't really have a lot of time with Sean in actual prep. It was just so chaotic. There was just so many things happening, and we had this little tiny office in Brighton Beach, and we were never there. All of our prep happens in scouting, I would say. In scouting, in the van, driving around, like taking photos on set, with like Artemis or whatever, just to like find our frames, our like key. Like, Sean is very, very concerned about the photography of the film and the compositions, and if we find like a place or a composition, he'll literally like write a scene so that it takes place in that frame, in that place, you know. Like he's not gonna write a scene that's gonna look like, you know what I mean? Like he's very aware of that in the writing process, and he wrote the script for the location, which is a really important thing too.
Wow, that's fascinating. Actually, that probably doesn't happen very often.
No, it doesn't, because because the weird thing is, okay, that house was actually owned by a Russian oligarch. It was built by a Russian oligarch. Then they moved out during COVID, and there was like hundreds of photos on Zillow because, you know, they were trying to sell the house, right? So he was able to like piece this script together and make it so specific and tailored to the space because of that. And you know, it all started because he Googled like, what is the best, nicest house in that part of, you know, Brighton Beach area, whatever. And that house came up. And then he did his research. It was a Russian oligarch's house. Found all the photos, wrote the script. And then our Ross Broder, our locations manager, was able to secure it. So it was like a dream come true when we actually locked that location. And then we were actually able to go there and spend time and block and sort of shot list the home invasion scene, which is really the only scene I will say that we like really honed in on and went deep into the blocking and shot design of, you know, that. And then the ending scene, the last scene in the movie, are like that. Those scenes are the movie, really. You know, that's kind of how we saw a lot of it, or at least I did. Like we had to nail those two sections, and I think we did. You know, I really love, those are like two of my favorite parts of the movie.
That was really cool to hear because it just goes to show how much the pre-production can impact the final film. Like the fact that Sean was writing scenes based on locations and not the other way around isn't really that normal as far as I know, but it makes total sense for this movie. Then I shifted gears to the actual shooting style of the film because in a lot of ways, Anora doesn't feel like a traditional Hollywood movie. The coverage is almost like controlled chaos sometimes, like the camera just happened to be in the middle of these wild events. I kind of wondered if they just shot it off the cuff like pure doc style, but it turns out it was a lot more designed than you might think.
It's actually quite blocked, I will say. Like it's much more controlled than you might think. And I think that's what makes him really special, is like taking a scene that feels like pure chaos and purely natural and unblocked and unrehearsed and unscripted even. But it's none of those things. He doesn't necessarily do it like how you do it on a TV show where you like, all right, this is the scene, let's read it out loud. Okay, now let's block it. Okay, now, okay, maybe we're here, blah, blah, blah. Okay, now let's show the crew and let's mark it, blah, blah, blah. It's not like that. Like that's just formulaic, and that's what a lot of people say is the right way to do it, but that's really not what we did. Oftentimes, me and Sean, we just kind of know what the master shot was. And sometimes once we're moving on to the scene, Mikey's got to go to hair and makeup and stuff, you know, like she's got to get it changed. It's going to take 30 minutes or 45 minutes. So rather than like take all this time to block the scene out and blah, 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 I'll set up the shot and we'll block it with like our first AD and with Sean, and we'll figure out what the shot is, and then the actors come and we sort of rehearse it, tweak it with them, and then we just shoot it. We just shoot it as quickly as we can. We start to get into the shooting of it because, for one, we don't want to waste a bunch of time, but for two, like Sean doesn't really like doing like big involved camera rehearsals where the actors are doing it how they're going to do it in the scene in a rehearsal. He's like, he'd rather roll it, you know, just in case something magical happens. So we kind of have them do like a walkthrough so we can just at least see the compositions with the actors in it. And then if we need to make some small adjustments, we'll make those. And then we just get into the shooting of it. And often Sean will rehearse out, you know, with the actors like away from the set, so that when he comes to the set, we might go through the blocking, but all of the dialogue and all the rehearsed part of it is pretty fresh for me. You know, I'm seeing it kind of for the first time often when they're doing it. But there are parameters. They have marks. There are shots, and there's a shot design to it, you know?
For me, that just really reinforces how important vision is in the filmmaking process, because the best of the best filmmakers are very intentional with what they want to make. Cinematography is there to support the vision and the story. It doesn't just exist for its own sake. But at the same time, they weren't rigid, and as much as they knew what they were trying to do, they also left room for real and unpredictable moments. It's all about having a plan, but also being open to what the world gives you. But let's hear what Drew has to say about it.
Even though like it's rehearsed, all of the stuff is rehearsed, but it's still chaotic and it feels real. And I think that's part of what makes Sean's film special, and also what makes this film so interesting too, is it feels very alive and unpredictable. I'd say especially once they leave the house after the home invasion and they're looking for Yvonne, like all of that stuff where they're just searching for Yvonne and like all the restaurants and this and that. A lot of that stuff is very off the cuff. You know, I'm shooting through windows from across the street, and people don't even know we're shooting a movie, you know? They'll go into a live restaurant or the pizza place, the place where the woman says like, oh, perhaps he was kidnapped. Like that's just like some woman who actually said that. That wasn't scripted. That was just a real customer at that restaurant, and we're shooting from across the street. And then, the courtroom was pretty wild, and I would say that was pretty, I didn't know where actors were necessarily going to go. We kind of sketched out a blocking for it, but then we just did it like a couple times from this angle, a couple times from this angle, a couple times from this angle. And did it like all on the zoom lens, so I could be really, really zoomed in and just kind of riff with the actors and the motions. And that was one of my favorite scenes to shoot. Actually, it was hilarious shooting that scene. We shot it super fast too. You know, we only had like so much time in the courthouse. So we had to find a way that was like fast that we could shoot it. So it's like very minimal lighting, and I'm just kind of hosing it down from this angle and hosing it down from this angle, but on a tripod, and very considered, and with these zooms and pans, and just kind of playing with the dynamics in the scene, and having fun with it, you know, and bringing that comedy, that playfulness of the camera into the comedy of the scene. You know, I think it actually helped. And that's one of the things about Sean, that when I first worked with him on Red Rocket, I was so shocked because I thought that he was like that. I thought it was going to be like, you know, Terrence Malick, or, you know, like just loose, you know, or like Harmony Korine or something, where you're just loose and you're just like letting the actors riff and you just roll and roll and roll. And, you know, it's not like that at all. It's actually very controlled. And, I'd say for the most part, if we can do it in a very controlled and composition heavy frame, you know, like just very formal compositional frame, like he loves that. He almost prefers that, you know. But then you like add chaos into that, and then you throw something into the mix to all up a little bit, and then now you have like more of a Sean Baker movie, you know?
Now, personally, I love all of Sean Baker's movies and their visual style, and honestly, before talking to Drew, I kind of thought the same thing, like he just filmed everything verite style. But that's why it's so good to actually hear it straight from Drew's mouth, because otherwise I would have been working from the wrong assumptions. That could easily lead to you being frustrated in your own work because you'll think you know how someone did it, but then when you try to do it the same way, it doesn't really work. And I love this balance of highly controlled but also loose and free, and now it makes total sense why Sean's movies are the way they are. Then we got into gear, because I guessed with a relatively low budget they would have needed to be very intentional with what they used. I mean, $6 million is still a lot of money, but with that you're not going to be able to afford to just have a bunch of 10-ton trucks full of unused gear sitting there just in case. So I wanted to know how they picked the gear and why they picked the gear they did, and how much of it was up to him versus being a collaboration.
I mean, a lot of it came from Sean. I'm just going to be honest, like right from the beginning, Sean was like, oh, we should shoot this on Lomos, which are, you know, older 70s Russian lenses, and they have everything that anamorphic is, you know, known for. Like they're funky, they have a lot of fall off, distortion, softness, I mean, flares, the orbital flares. And there's that one scene where she's dancing, you know, in the living room for him, and she gets on top of him and takes her shirt off, and it's just like this crazy array of flares, you know, which the movie doesn't have a lot of flares, but when it does, it's like that, you know. or when the mom comes down the steps at the airport, you know, off the plane, and it's just like dramatic, crazy lens flares.
Did you shine lights in from the side? Like, did you do that intentionally, or was that just
just the sun? Yeah. So yeah, that was always part of the visual look of the film, and like one, you know, that was established early on. Sean was like, well, what about Lomos? And I was like, that's a great idea. The film is literally about Russians. Let's shoot with old Russian lenses. And then 35 millimeter, we were both just on board with that. Like, you know, we did the last one on 16 anamorphic, and this one felt like it had to be 35 anamorphic. Also, it had to be anamorphic, not spherical. It just felt right for the story. It felt like it needed a little bit of that magic that anamorphic can bring, that kind of a fairy tale quality, you know, and this like classic Hollywood. I just like the films that I loved when I was growing up were all anamorphic 35 millimeter. There was something really interesting about doing that, and also just the magic quality that anamorphic brings. We did have a couple of like I had some like Orions that were just like I had as a backup in case I needed low light levels, which I did in the car. You can't really shoot the Lomos like wide open all the way, like they kind of fall apart a little bit. So I tried to keep some sharpness and contrast by using those lenses. And then we used this crazy Lomo zoom that really became like the signature. When we were finding the look of the film, we tested this lens and it was like, holy crap, this is the look of Anora. It was the 40-120 Lomo zoom. It's a front anamorphic zoom with like a leather bellows, like accordion bellows on the front of it. There's literal leather on this lens, and it's just this beast of a lens with this big, huge square front. It's beautiful.
Did it weigh a million pounds?
Absolutely beautiful lens. Yeah, it was not as heavy as the 12-1 zoom, but it was heavy. And it's just so beautiful and so old. It looks like it should be in a museum, you know, and we were using this lens on film. You know, we had to shoot at like a 5.6 to get enough sharpness out of it. Otherwise it was just pure like milkiness. It would just fall apart. Even so, like the opening shot of the movie was shot with that lens where we're tracking along the dancers and then zoom into Mikey.
Now that was really interesting because to me, not all directors are like that. And it's such a bold choice to use Lomos because they're really old and very distinct looking, but obviously when you watch the movie, you can see they were the perfect choice. I'm pretty sure the lenses Drew mentioned were made in like the 80s, so it just goes to show that so much of what floats around online about picking apart the chromatic aberration or the edge-to-edge sharpness of this lens versus that lens is mostly just noise. If you really want good cinematography, it's about picking what fits the story, not just what's the most expensive or the newest. And then also not being scared to mix and match things based on the logistics and the budget, because you can easily drive yourself crazy watching review and comparison videos these days. Next, we shifted gears to the lighting package.
I mean, it was always pretty small. I mean, we only really, for the most part, we only ever really carried like a 6,500 watt generator. Except at the house. At the house, we had one 18K as well. And at the church. At the church, I had, I think I had 3 18Ks coming through the windows just because I needed consistent light, you know? But yeah, I mean, that's it. Like one 18K, and we usually bounced it or threw a big rag over the window, or we had to do a lot of like night for day at the house purely because we didn't have enough daylight. And you know, it was dead of winter. We had like 8 or 9 hours of shootable light each day, so I'd have to find a couple of shots to do night for day. So we would just like stretch, you know, 20 bys over the windows and back off the 18K and just hit it and push the film to stop. Everything was pushed to stop in the house, just so I had like a consistent grain structure. And then I'd also exposed everything the same way throughout that entire sequence and took really detailed notes about my exposures so that it was consistent, you know?
So like the strip club and the night party and stuff, is that all just practical, or did you carry around like LEDs and stuff, or how did you?
Oh yeah, no, we lit all that stuff. Like the strip club almost had no usable light. It was all just like the messiest, cheapest LED lights, you know, so we kind of had to start from scratch and build it up. Yeah, and then like the nighttime streets, we try to find areas that had pockets of light. We're always searching for good areas of light. I just use very minimal LED lighting for most of that stuff. And then I would push the film pretty heavily to beat it up a little bit, because I really like that. in film. I like the grain. I like the edge of exposure in a lot of ways.
What specifically, like what types of LEDs were you carrying around? Just like two Titans, or what did you use?
Yeah, we used Titans. We used some like homemade light pads for the car stuff that were RGB, and then we used a lot of vortexes. I don't think we had Q8s, but I love the Q8. I usually would carry several Q8s. But I think we had this light called a Pro Light, it's basically like essentially like a Q10. You know, it has like a Fresnel lens, and you could swap out lenses in front of it. It's a RGB LED light. It's a great light. And then what else? We had this light that my gaffer called the Dragon of Chaos. It's basically, I could send you a picture of it. It's just like a 5x5 like softbox, but it's like only like this deep, so it doesn't require a huge chimera. I think it's a Kino. It's made by Kino, and then he would do this like spun cotton sort of diffusion over it, but it basically diffuses it heavily. It's basically like it becomes like a book light. You know, it becomes very soft. Yeah, so that's basically what we use. All
right, that was super interesting, and definitely a pretty minimal approach by Hollywood standards. For sure, there was some high-level lighting going on, and they had more gear than just a couple of aperture lights, but compared to some sets I've been on where there are like 15, 20K lights on scissorless everywhere and monster generators all over the place, this lighting package was pretty minimal. Then to wrap up, I wanted to get a sense of speed and how fast Drew worked to get what he wanted. Because sometimes DPs will spend hours or even days tweaking their lighting setups and being perfectionists about everything, but that's never really been my personal style, and I wanted to know how Drew worked because it didn't feel like that kind of a movie. And as it turned out, he likes to work fast too.
Well, I don't know. I feel like there's this energy on a film set. There's a lot of energy. I personally just think that you have to keep that up. And once you start taking a long time to light a scene or to set up like a huge jib on a dolly track onto this, onto that, it can just like bog people down and bog the actors down. I think it's a lot about the actors too. So I like, on this one, for instance, I wanted to lay minimal dolly track. I tried to dolly on the floor as much as possible. We had these amazing marble floors at the house, and even on carpet, I don't care. I'd dolly right on the carpet. The carpet was smooth enough, and I would just like not even ride the dolly. I would just kind of help push it along like a big slider. I mean, we did stuff like that all the time. Like that shot in Vegas that like tracks around them in a half circle. Like that was just me and the dolly grip pushing the dolly on carpet, Also the directors, like I think if you can get more setups in a day, like I think any director is going to take that, If it still looks good and feels good, but you're getting more setups, I remember hearing like, well, why did Martin Scorsese go with Ballhaus instead of Michael Chapman, who I love Michael Chapman's work, Taxi Driver, Raging Bull, and then he went with Ballhaus, I think maybe after hours, because he was getting like almost twice as many setups a day. Like he was just getting way more shots. And as a director, it's valuable. So, I don't know, I like to work quick, I like to make quick decisions, and I like to keep that energy going on set. Also, helps help the actors out and not have them like just waiting, Like I like to be able to just, if I'm gonna move in for a close-up, that should be like 5 minutes or less, like if we've already lit the scene, or if we're turning around, maybe that's 15, 20 minutes. Because I like to get all of the pieces in place to make the turnaround fast. You know what I mean? I like to light the whole scene, have everything kind of there, even though maybe if everything behind the camera might be turned off. Boom, we turn around, everything comes on, everything goes off behind the camera this way now, and we're ready to go in 15 minutes, Or I also like to, say there is a dolly shot or a big dolly shot or a big, or a jib or something. I like to get that going ahead of time, like we're shooting the scene, so I always like to leapfrog crew to get ahead on the next thing. I think that's a very important part of filmmaking and being a DP is thinking ahead, and it's hard when you're operating too, because when you're operating you tend to just be like literally tunnel vision because you're looking through a tunnel essentially. The camera, but you also have to be mindful of like what's next, and what pieces you can get in play, ahead of time. But I did operate on Anora for the whole movie, and I actually kind of prefer that, especially with film. I just like to watch I just like to be looking through the eyepiece. It's just a very magical experience, and it's hard to give that up. Digital's another thing. I think, you kind of want to look at a really nice monitor. I think you can see exactly what you're going to get, so it's easier to just kind of take a step back and oversee more. But on film, I feel like I'm steering the ship from the front of the ship. You know what I mean? I'm right there, and you have to be looking through that eyepiece. That's another important thing.
Yeah. Also, people can't just stand around and look over your shoulder.
Yeah, I'm like, well, get the out of here. Like, like we're working. Actors are there rehearsing, whatever. It's like, no, you can't. It kind of focuses the energy in a really, I don't know, just kind of classic old school way. I think it puts a lot of emphasis on the camera, on the set, on what's in front of the camera, what does the camera see. People are welcome to, if they want to look through the eyepiece, I encourage that because it's magical. People are always like, oh man, look, I'm not sure how it's going to look, blah, 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 blah. Like, well, just look through the eyepiece. It looks absolutely beautiful, for the set decorator or for the production designer or makeup or whatever, just know it looks good. Trust me, like, just take a look. Or for the director even, because often they see the film through this, like, video tab. Sean is a very good camera operator himself. So, like, sometimes, I don't think on Anora he really ever wanted to look through the camera, which is weird, but, like, maybe he did once or twice, but I remember Red Rocket, he would look through a bit more. But yeah, he just trusts me a lot too, which is just a beautiful thing,
Yeah, it all comes back to those long-term relationships. Cool, man. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Cool, thanks, man. Yeah, it was fun to talk about different stuff because I can't tell you, I just did 2 podcasts yesterday, so it's nice to get different questions,
So there we go. I had such a great time talking to Drew and picking his brain, especially for a doc shooter like me who isn't always around high-level narrative people. But good cinematography is good cinematography, and even though I love what I do, learning from talented people in different genres makes me better, and it'll make you better too. There were tons of lessons in there, but if there's any main takeaway for me, it's that everything has to be in service of the story. The gear, the lights, the pace of work, the pre-pro, all of it has to fit the story, not the other way around. So hopefully you got as much out of that as I did, and thanks to Drew for sharing all that. And I'll be rooting for Anora at the Oscars this year. If you haven't seen it yet, you should, because in my opinion, it's hands down one of the best movies of the year. See ya.